so today we're starting chapter 6, which is about the output and exchange rate in the short run. Okay. So I hope you have prepared for it as usual. I assume that you have prepared for it. But before that, I want to sort of let me think about what I should do. Okay, I want to give you some hints about problem set 2, but I want to postpone until the end of the class. Otherwise, it may take too long. Okay. So tomorrow, that's a tutorial. Besides going through the problem set 2, question 4 to 6, the TA is going to go through the, he's going to give back the midterm, graded midterm to you, and go through the midterm a little bit. Okay, so make sure you go to the tutorial tomorrow. Okay. So let me see whether this works. Hello? Okay. Yeah, it does work. All right, let's see. Okay. So today we're going to talk about the short-run model. So I already told you repeatedly that our model actually builds up chapter after chapter. So the model becomes more and more sophisticated. So in this chapter we're going to make the model even more sophisticated. Okay. So in the last few chapters we talk about the money market equilibrium. We talk about the exchange rate, foreign exchange market equilibrium. We put them together, and then we talk about how some let's say monetary policy will affect various variables in the short run as well as long run. Right? We talk about like if there's a permanent change in money supply, how is it going to affect the interest rate in the short run, interest rate in the long run, price level in the short run, price level in the long run, exchange rate in the short run and exchange rate in the long run, and things like that, right? So, but then one crucial variable in the analysis of short term is the EE, is the expectation variable. In this course, particularly, is the expectation about the exchange rate. And that expectation about the exchange rate is a crucial variable in analyzing the exchange rate, the movement of the exchange rate. Okay, and the movement of the exchange rate is going to have repercussions. Now, in the last chapter, we spent a lot of time trying to understand what determines the exchange rate in the long run. So the exchange rate in the long run will pin down the EE. Okay, so basically the long run exchange rate is just the EE. Okay, so we talk about the purely monetary shock and also purely non-monetary shock. So at the end of the day, we conclude that the long run nominal exchange rate is determined by both the real side of the economy as well as the monetary side of the economy, right? Monetary shock as well as real shock will both affect the long run nominal exchange rate. Now this chapter, in this chapter, we're going to make use of all the previous results in the previous chapters, but our goal is to look at what determines short run not just exchange rate, interest rate, but also output. So one very important variable that we have not endogenized in the previous chapters is output. We treated output as given in the previous chapters, but we will not be very satisfied with that, because output is really a very important variable that you want to know what determines output, right? So output is a variable, is one of the most important variables in the macroeconomy, right? So if you have a recession, then output is low, is small. If you have a boom, then output is large, is high. So output is very, very important. Output is closely related to unemployment rate, right? Is closely related to people's welfare, obviously, right? So we want to have a model that will simultaneously determine output and exchange rate and interest rate. Okay, so these are the most important variables in the macroeconomy, right? So you remember when you study your closed economy macroeconomics, people pay a lot of attention to output, to interest rate, to inflation, to unemployment, right? These are the most important variables in the macroeconomy. So same thing with the open economy macro, we similarly pay attention to what determines output, what determines interest rate, what determines your inflation rate, but one more variable, exchange rate, is that separates open economy macro from closed economy macro, is that we pay a lot of attention to the exchange rate. The reason, one of the most important reasons is because the exchange rate affects trade, affect exports and imports, which in turn will affect aggregate demand. I have not defined what is aggregate demand, but actually if you have studied closed economy macro, you know what is aggregate demand, right? So actually you should know what is aggregate demand already. But in the open economy, the aggregate demand has one more component, which is net export, export minus import. So that is one more element. This is one more component to the aggregate demand, is the net export. And net export is directly related to the exchange rate. That's why exchange rate is so important when we study open economy macroeconomics, okay? So open economy macroeconomics is particularly relevant to smaller countries, small open economies. In a country, in a place like Hong Kong, open economy macroeconomics is particularly relevant compared with like larger economies like the U.S. Because in the U.S., you know, the net export, it's only a very small percentage of the GDP of the country for the U.S. But for Hong Kong, a place like Hong Kong, net export is actually composed of a much larger percentage of aggregate demand. So a place like Hong Kong, its aggregate demand depends very much on, you know, net export. Okay, export and import is very, very important to a small open economy like Hong Kong. So, the analysis that we carry out in this chapter is particularly relevant to a country or a region where the net export composed of a high percentage of the aggregate demand. Okay, so in that kind of places, that kind of regions or countries, exchange rate is a very important variable. Okay, so that's why, for example, Hong Kong is adopting a linked exchange rate system, right? That actually it's a sign that exchange rate is really important for a place like Hong Kong. For a country like Singapore, for example, they also pay a lot of attention to the exchange rate. Okay, so they unlike Hong Kong, Singapore adopts a more allow the exchange rate to float a little bit more. Basically, they adopt something I would call managed float. They manage the exchange rate, but let it float nonetheless. But they certainly it's very sensitive. The economy of Singapore also very, very sensitive to the exchange rate. Okay, so so let's see. So we really when we talk about the short run, okay. So in this chapter we're talking about the short run, right? So the short run we already defined previously. The short run is a state in which the price level doesn't adjust. Okay, because price level is sticky. Okay, and this is important because because there's lots of shocks in the economy, right? In the open economy, think of Hong Kong, right? The external shocks, lots of external shocks. Let's say if the rest of the world is in a recession, typically Hong Kong will also be in a recession, because Hong Kong is so externally dependent. If the rest of the world is in a recession, the external demand for Hong Kong's exports will also be low, and so Hong Kong's net export will also be lower, and that actually will reduce Hong Kong's GNP to a lower level. So typically, when we say a country is in a recession, if its output, if GNP is below the full employment level, okay, or sufficiently below the full employment level. So we have a full employment level output. There's a full employment output level, okay, which we call YF or something like that. Full employment. So under full employment, so in the long run, we assume that in the long run, the output of the economy is at the full employment level, because all the prices, the general price level will be free to adjust. The prices of all the goods and services are free to adjust in the long run, and so the economy will be at the full employment level, and the full employment output level is determined solely by the technology and the supply of factors of production, like labor, capital, land, right? So that is the idea. So basically, okay. But when there are shocks to this economy, if there are negative shocks to the economy, that can shift the economy to below full employment. If that shock is sufficiently large, then the economy is in a recession. So, but there can be some government policy that can help to alleviate that kind of situation. Okay, so fiscal policy and monetary policy can help to alleviate that situation when the economy is below full employment. Okay, when the economy is below full employment level, both fiscal policy and monetary policy can be employed to somehow shift the economy closer or back to the full employment level. So we're going to talk about that as well. Okay. So the short run is basically like some sort of a business cycle effect. Okay. So the short run is very important. Okay. The short run is very important because the economy almost always is in the short run. Okay. So the long run is just almost like an idealized kind of situation, which is almost never attained because there's always shocks in the economy. So that's why the short run is actually more important than the long run. To understand the short run, in some sense, is more important than understanding the long run. However, we also know that we need to understand the long run in order to understand the short run as well. So long run, we need to understand the long run because we want to know the benchmark. Okay, this benchmark, this full employment benchmark, how far away are we from that benchmark, right? So, there is a famous saying, John Maynard Keynes, who is one of the greatest economists ever lived. John Maynard Keynes said that in the long run, we're all dead. So he really cares about the short run, okay? So he's basically the pioneer of modern macroeconomics, okay? So modern macroeconomics basically are mostly concerned about the short run, okay? So Keynes obviously is concerned, very much concerned about the short run. Okay, so that's why it's important to understand the short run. Okay. Is there any question? Okay, so we're going to explain the role of real exchange rate in determining the aggregate demand for a country's output. So real exchange rate, okay, it's going to be very important. How that affects the aggregate demand, and also we're going to see how in an open economy how to sort of analyze the short run equilibrium of the economy, and we're going to use a kind of framework. This framework is called AADD framework. Okay, AADD framework, and this framework can help us to determine the exchange rate and the output at the same time. Okay, so basically, we have it's a general equilibrium analysis. Okay, general. So we're talking about general equilibrium. So in macroeconomics, we always interested in the general equilibrium. So. So we're going to look at the general equilibrium, and in fact, this AADD framework helps us to think about this general equilibrium, because general equilibrium means what? Means all the markets are in equilibrium. Okay, all the markets are in equilibrium. Okay, so. We have actually all the markets. So we have actually talked about many markets in the past, right? So can you tell me what markets we have talked about? We talked about equilibrium in what sort of markets in the past, in the last? Foreign exchange market, okay. That's one market. What's the other market that we also?
Domestic money market.
Money market, okay, the money market, okay. The foreign exchange market. These two markets, okay, are the ones that we have talked about, and we analyze the equilibrium, right? We analyze the equilibrium in these two markets, and we actually put them together, right? So, so in some sense, we were approaching the general equilibrium, but there's one more market we have missed so far. So we have the, as you just said, we have the foreign exchange market. So, and then we have the money market, the domestic money market, as you said, just the money market. And then there's a third one we have not talked about, which is the output market that we're going to talk about in this chapter. Okay, this output market, to be more specific, we'll want to know. So the output of the economy. How is it determined in the short run? Output market in the short run. In the short run. In the short run. Okay. And once we take into account all these three markets, the equilibrium, these three markets, this AADD framework will help us to put together all the three markets together to analyze the equilibrium, the general equilibrium of these three markets. And then later on, we'll talk about the effects of monetary policy. We still use the AADD framework. So AADD framework is really important. Is really important in this course because that is really the ultimate goal of what we want to achieve in the model building. So AADD, you must try to understand the AADD framework very well. Okay, so we talk about determined aggregate demand, short-run model of output market, short-run model of asset markets. The asset markets, what I mean by asset markets is really, these are the asset markets. Foreign exchange and money market, these are asset markets. And this is the output market, okay? And then we'll actually also talk about current account, how the current account adjusts, how the current account is affected. Also, we will talk about liquidity trap and zero interest rates. So this chapter is really rich, very, very rich. Okay, questions? Okay, so let's try some fill in the blanks. I hope I can remember what are the. I can't remember what is the correct answer actually. So long run models are useful when all blank or blank and blank have time to adjust. So what do you mean? What do you think? All what? All markets of what and what have time to adjust? No, of all factors of production and what?
And
what do you mean by all factors of production have time to adjust? What do you mean by adjustment of factor of production? Yeah. Very good. That's what I'm looking for anyway. So all prices of goods and services have time to adjust. Okay, so prices. So price is the key word, okay? Price is the key word, and then goods and services are also the key words, okay? So not just goods, but also services, okay? So the economy is producing goods and services, right? So, so in the short run, some what of what and what may not have time to adjust. What do you think? Yeah, just the same. Just the same. Okay. Prices of goods and services may not have time to adjust due to labor contracts, cost of adjustment, or imperfect information about willingness of customers to pay at different prices. So it's a bunch of factors here, which we don't care to explain in detail. Okay. So labor contracts, you know, when you have labor contracts, then the wages may be sticky in the short run, because once workers sign the labor contract, the wage is fixed for a certain period of time. So if there are many, if workers tend to sign contracts, then it will provide some stickiness to wages. When wages are sticky, prices will also be kind of sticky, because prices are basically cost, right? The prices reflect cost, and wage is a very important part of cost. So when wages are sticky, prices are also sticky, and also cost of adjustment. There are costs of adjustment to prices. Price adjustment, you can't just raise the price immediately. It takes time. Imperfect information. Imperfect information. It's if you still remember your closed economy macro. There is a whole theory about asymmetric information, how asymmetric information may affect price, may affect how firms determine whether or not they want to raise the price of their good. Okay, so sometimes firms don't know. The asymmetric information comes from the fact that, so the firm, let's say I'm a furniture company, okay? So I try to determine whether I should raise my price, because I'm kind of seeing that that price that my let's say my cost has increased, okay? So maybe the wood that I buy to make furniture has risen in price. So I'm wondering, well, should I pass this on to the consumers and raise my price? That's a very important question, right? So how do I make that decision? Well, I kind of make the decision. One of the important factors I make the decision is I want to know whether that change in price of my material is just because just wood has become more expensive, or is it that there's a general price increase there? Is this price increase a general price increase, or is it just the price of my input that is increasing? So this kind of asymmetric information may make companies hesitate to increase the price of their good if they're not sure whether it's a general price increase or just a price increase in their own sector. Okay. So but anyway, basically it takes time. Basically, it takes time for price to adjust. That's the bottom line. So we'll be on a short run and long run model of exchange rate to explain how output is related to exchange rates in the short run. Okay. It shows how macroeconomics can affect production, employment, and current accounts. So we're going to talk about fiscal policy and monetary policy. These are macroeconomic policies, the two macroeconomic policies that we're going to do. So aggregate demand is the aggregate amount of goods and services that individuals and institutions are willing to buy. So in the first, I guess in the second chapter, we already talked about the national income accounting, right? And national income accounting, we say, one way of looking at national income is to break it down into expenditure. Okay, with consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure or government purchases, and then net expenditure by foreigners. So these are the four components when we talk about the national income accounting. So in the same way, we use these components as components of aggregate demand. So we talk about the consumption demand, investment demand, government demand, demand, government purchases, government expenditure demand or whatever, government demand. And then the final is the net expenditure, net demand from the rest of the world, basically. So that final one, the current account, is basically net demand from the rest of the world. So all these are demands, okay? All these are demands. So these demands will, when you add them together, that's called the aggregate demand, okay? This aggregate demand would interact with the aggregate supply to determine actually the aggregate demand itself, it's already almost by definition it determines the output, actually determines the output of the economy. So the aggregate demand would actually determine the output of the economy. Okay. So we have to analyze each one of these, right? Consumption. So what determines consumption? Okay. What do you think? What determines the consumption demand of an economy? Disposable income. Okay. So why? Right.
People use that money to spend on goods.
Okay, so if disposable income is higher, then consumption demand will be higher, right? Okay, so that makes a lot of sense, right? So are there other factors? Can you think of other factors that can affect consumption demand?
Consumer confidence in the economy.
Okay, yeah.
During recessions, people tend to save and they
Sure.
give very cheap.
Yeah, definitely. What else? What else can affect the consumption demand?
Interest rate?
How?
Interest rate, high interest rate increases savings, so that people save more in order to.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, that's a good point, actually. I would say it should be real interest rate, because real interest rate is more important than normal interest rate in terms of determining people's saving. If real interest rate is higher, then people tend to save more, so they consume less. I think that's a valid point. Yeah. What else can you think of? What can affect the consumption demand of the economy? What about wealth effect? Do you still remember this wealth effect? So when the stock market is doing really well, then people feel that they're wealthy, they'll spend more. So this is called wealth effect. Okay, it's a little bit psychological, but it actually is also a real effect. Okay, so we have identified a lot of factors, right? However, I have to say that for our purpose of building this model of looking at general equilibrium analysis, unfortunately we have to simplify the model. So we have to actually ignore a lot of effects. Okay, so your effects. Let's see. Okay, so we have to ignore a lot of effects, unfortunately, because for the sake of simplicity, because we want to analyze the general equilibrium, we have to make it really simple. Okay, so we only assume that consumption demand is only affected by disposable income. Okay. We ignore the effect of real interest rate. We'll ignore the effect of the wealth effect or consumer confidence, that kind of thing. We're going to ignore it. So yeah, it is admittedly this is a weakness of the model, but for the sake of our for the sake of understanding things, okay, at this level, it's necessary to make this kind of assumption. I mean, if you're at the graduate level, if you're in a PhD program, you know, you talk about if you focus on how consumption demand is affected. If you focus on what we call consumption function, you can do a very, very detailed analysis of how consumption is affected by various things. You can do a very detailed analysis. So that would be at another level of sophistication and another level of detail. But for our purpose, just very simple, okay? So disposable income, we just know that, right? So, if your income, so typically people, for the household, okay, for household in particular, because consumption is typically just household behavior. So, so typically the household will consume only a fraction of the disposable income, and then they will save the rest, okay? But if their disposable income increases, the consumption will also increase, right? Yeah, we also talk about real interest rate. It can influence saving behavior, and then wealth. Okay, we have already covered these things. Okay, so how about current account? Current account. Now, current account. Okay, so I actually have given away the answer here. Okay, so current account, right? Export minus import. So what affects export and import? So one very important factor is the real exchange rate. So we already talked about this in the previous chapter, right? So the real exchange rate tells you the relative price of home good to that of foreign good. So if your real exchange rate is high, if real exchange rate is high, that means if real exchange rate is high, it means that domestic good is relatively cheap compared with foreign good. Okay, so if the real exchange rate increases, that means there's a real depreciation of the currency. A real depreciation of currency means that the volume of export will increase and volume of import will decrease. Okay, so presumably it will increase your net export. Okay, presumably, but actually, what I just said is not exactly correct, because because you have to remember, in other words, what I just said about a real depreciation will increase net export, right? Just now I said that. But that statement itself is not always correct. It really depends on how how much is the price elasticity of export and price elasticity of import. So the elasticities of export and import play a very important role in determining whether a real depreciation will increase net export or not. Okay, we're going to talk about it a little bit more later. Okay, but but we know that real exchange rate definitely is very important in determining the volume of export and volume of import. Okay. So this concept of real exchange rate affecting export and import is very important. You must understand this very well. Okay. So this real exchange rate, as I said, whenever real exchange rate has depreciated, that means your home good is cheaper relative to foreign goods. Okay. So not just your home citizens, not just the home resident feel that home goods are cheaper, but foreign residents also feel that home goods are cheaper. Okay, and also not just home residents feel that foreign goods are more expensive, but even foreign residents feel that foreign goods are more expensive. Okay, so so that explains why it affects the net exports. So the other variable is the disposable income, right? Which also makes sense, right? So disposable income will basically affect what? Affect import. If you have more income, more disposable income, you want to consume more. So it's a little bit like the effect of disposable income is similar. We talk about how disposable income affect consumption. Okay, you can think of part of the consumption goods are actually imported. Okay, when disposable income is higher, people want to consume more. But part of the consumption, part of this consumption is actually imported consumer goods. That's why disposable income increases imports. Okay, but disposable income, do you think disposable income will affect export? Do you think domestic disposable income will affect export? Probably not, right? It's hard to think of a relationship. But when foreign disposable income increase, that will affect export. Export will increase. Okay. So so the current account. Okay. So it's now time to talk about the volume effect and value effect. Okay. So we just said that when so this real exchange rate, we call it Q, right? So Q is by definition equal to E P over P star over P. Okay. E P star over P. So the way to remember this, usually the way I remember it is by sort of, this is how I remember. I first think about this and then I rewrite it to this way. But why do I think this is easy to remember? Because I know that E is, it's Q multiplied by a relative price. But whether this is P star over P or P over P star, we oftentimes get confused, right? So the way I remember it is that whenever price increase, E will increase. Domestic price, whenever domestic price increase, E will increase. So in other words, remember that is because whenever your domestic inflation, your price, the price of the good increases, your exchange rate would also depreciate. Okay, if the price of your good increase, your exchange rate will depreciate. So it's like this is like a long run. You remember this is like kind of a long run relationship that we talked about in the last chapter. So so P and E are kind of positively correlated. This is how I remember this. So this real exchange rate is this thing, right? Okay. So when this becomes, when this rises, okay, when this rises, the price won't go rise. So the volume export will rise. The volume means the quantity. The quantity of export will rise for sure, because when the that's a downsloping demand curve. The volume or the quantity of import falls, right? That's very easy to understand. However, you have to remember that export, for example, okay, we have export, right? Export is not just the quantity, right? It is the quantity of exports multiplied by the price of exports. And then the import is the quantity of imports multiplied by the price of imports, assuming that it's just one good. Okay, so although you're of course exporting different types of goods, but just pretend that you export just one good. So you have a downward sloping demand curve, right? So you when the price, if this is the price, this is the quantity, then when the price falls, the quantity will increase, right? So this is basically the idea when you depreciate, when your currency undergoes real depreciation, the quantity of export will increase, the quantity of imports will decrease. However, the price, it's a little bit, the price of exports, measured in your currency, right? So the price of exports, this will be unchanged. Okay, so this, let's say let's say the price of exports, you maintain the same domestic price. Okay, because this is expressed in your own currency, right? So this is unchanged, price of exports. So just make the assumption that the exporters, they will price the same domestic price regardless of whether there is an appreciation or depreciation. Okay, so this is unchanged. However, the price of imports now actually has gone up, right? In expressed in home currency has gone up because and that is the reason why this goes down, right? So is it clear or am I not clear? So okay, exporters, assume that exporters, when they sell to foreigners, they want to get back the domestic price in domestic currency. Same domestic price when denominated in their own currency. So let's say, for example, the Americans, they sell jeans, right? Each pair of jeans is $50, worth $50. When they sell to Europe, if the exchange rate is each US dollar is worth 0.8 euros, then they'll collect 40 euros from the foreigners. They will price the good at 40 euros. Okay, so the price of jeans, US jeans, at home is $50 US. Let's say US dollar, so each euro, 1 euro, so 1 US dollar is equal to 0.8 euro. Okay, let's say. Then the Americans, they will, US jeans sold in Europe will be priced at 40 euros because they are sold at this price, and so they want to get the same price when they're sold overseas. Okay, so that's the assumption. Okay, I'm not saying that. So this is the assumption. So regardless of, suppose here there is the reason why these real exchange rate rises is because E rises. Just suppose E rises. Okay, E rises. if E rises, then the price, the Americans, they the price of export is unchanged in U.S. dollar, okay, but the price of the imports now is more expensive because remember the euro, okay, Europe. So European sweater, okay, at its home, cost I don't know how many euros do you want? You want you want let's say 40 euros. Oh, no, not 40 euros. It's a little bit. Let's say 60 euros. Okay. So European sweater sold in the U.S. right? Initially the price was it was what? So this divided by 0.8. So what is that? 5 over 4, 75 US dollar initially before the depreciation of the US dollar. But we assume that the US dollar have depreciated, right? So initially 0.8, but now it depreciates. Maybe, I don't know, each perhaps the US dollar depreciates, so it becomes 1 US dollar is only worth let's say 0.6, okay, becomes 0.6 euro. Then now the sweater when sold in the U.S. become more expensive in US dollar terms, right? It will become what? It will become 60 divided by 0.6. Am I right? Divided by 0.6, it becomes 100. 60 divided by 0.6 is equal to 100, right? So now it becomes US dollar. So after the depreciation, after US dollar depreciation, it becomes $100 per sweater. So this price increase. This is we're still talking about the U.S. So this is the home country is the U.S. Okay. Okay, does that make sense? Now, so the export will definitely increase, but import, may increase or decrease. Import may also increase if this increase a lot. You know, it really depends on the elasticity. That's what I'm saying. That in this case, the elasticity of demand, in particular, this is the import. If this is the import, then this falls. Quantity. This is just the opposite. The quantity falls, right? The price rises. So it's just the opposite. The price rises, quantity falls. Okay. Whether or not this number increase or decrease is not clear. It depends on the elasticity. If the elasticity is very low, then this would mean that that this is very steep. Okay, the price elasticity is very, very low. This is very steep. Then it means that the change in price will actually let me see. This import will actually increase the quantity. This product will actually increase. Okay, so if elasticity, the price elasticity of demand for imports is very low, then the demand curve is very steep, right? Then the increase in price will lead to a very large, very little decrease in quantity, so this whole thing will rise. Then IM rises as a result of the US dollar depreciation as E increases. Okay, of course, P and P star unchanged, okay? Just assume that this P and P star unchanged. So what does that mean? That means that export increases, but import also increases. So then it is not clear whether the net export actually increases or decreases. You see, but if the elasticity of demand for import is sufficiently high, okay, then this is going to decrease. Then we know that net export is going to increase. Okay, so a more sophisticated analysis of this thing is actually in the appendix of this chapter. So there is a condition. The condition is called Marshall-Lerner condition, which we'll discuss later. The if the Marshall-Lerner condition is a condition, basically says that the elasticity, the elasticity of demand for import plus the elasticity of demand for exports, if that is greater than 1, then the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied. If the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied, then a real depreciation will lead to an increase in net exports. Does that make sense? Okay. So it depends not just on the elasticity of export demand, but also elasticity of import demand. So the two, as long as the total elasticity add up to greater than 1, that means that it's sufficiently elastic. If both of them are sufficiently elastic, or one of them sufficiently elastic, then a real depreciation will lead to an increase in net exports. Okay, in that case, the volume effect will dominate the value effect. We call it the so-called value effect is really the price of imports. That's what we call the value. Price is value. Okay. This is the volume. This is the volume effect. This is the volume effect. These two are volume effect. This is the value effect. Now this effect, this has no effect because it's evaluated in the home currency, the export. Okay. Does that make sense? So if the volumes of import and export do not change much, the value effect may dominate the volume effect when the exchange rate changes. This is exactly what I just said here, right? If the volume of import do not change much, if the elastic demand for import is very low, that would be the case. Okay, the volume of import and export, well, this is particularly the import, the case of import. It does not change much. The volume of imports do not change much. Then the value effect may dominate the volume effect. And in this case, it might lead to an increase in the value, the total value of imports. So it is possible that so basically the idea is that in the short run, the elasticities of demand for import as well as the elasticity of demand for exports are both relatively low in the short run. So in the short run, elasticities are usually lower. If you still recall, do you still recall your microeconomics, principles of microeconomics? Say, it takes time for behavior to change. In the short run, you can't really change your habit. Even if the price rise, you still have to consume the same quantity in the short run because it's hard to change your habit or change to some substitutes. See, whether or not you're a consumer or you are a manufacturer, in the short run, it's hard to find substitutes. So short-run price elasticity of demand is usually quite low, okay? But in the longer run, your price elasticity of demand usually is larger. So, so in the long run, therefore, the Marshall-Lerner condition will tend to be satisfied. You see? So that's why people say that within a sufficiently long period of time, for example, a year, or even for something like a year, if you give people a year, it probably this Marshall-Lerner condition is probably going to be satisfied within after a year of the change in the real exchange rate. So the time frame is approximately a year or less. So the evidence indicates that for most countries, volume effect dominates the value effect after 1 year or less. Okay, because of that, the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied. Let's assume for now that the real depreciation leads to an increase in the current account. Assume that the volume effect dominates the value effect. In other words, we assume that there is sufficient time for people for the quantity to adjust to the price change. Does it make sense? All right. Okay. Now, so next is okay. So actually, this is the what I just said. A real depreciation leads to an increase in the current account if and only if the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied. That is, the volume effect dominates the value effect. And that Marshall-Lerner condition, the condition says that the sum of the elasticity of export demand and the elasticity of import demand with respect to the real exchange rate is greater than 1. It's greater than 1. Okay? All right? Is that clear? Yeah, the price of export demand and price of import demand are both small in the short run than in the long run. Okay, so the quality of export demand needs time to adjust to change in export price. As I just said, you need time to find a substitute. The quality of import demand needs time to adjust to change in import price, right? So to give you more concrete example, right? Let's say if the price of coffee increase, let's say you're a coffee drinker, right? So if the price of coffee change a lot, increase by 50%, right? It's large change. You probably will drink less coffee in the longer run. You may even switch to something else like tea. Okay, so if you give you enough time, you will adjust. Your elasticity of demand will be larger over time, right? Okay, that's another factor which affect how exchange rate will affect export and import. Okay, it's something called the exchange rate pass-through, which we'll actually also talk about it. We talk about this in a little bit more detail later. But just to give you an idea what is exchange rate pass-through, exchange rate pass-through sometimes is complete, sometimes it's incomplete. So what do you mean by exchange rate pass-through is incomplete? So remember just now I said, right? So the Europeans, for example, they sell at home, they sell their sweaters at 60 euro per piece. When they sell it in the US, they also want to collect 60 euro for the sweater. So when the US dollar depreciate, they will have to price their sweater at a higher US dollar price, right? Because they want to get back 60 euros. But this actually does not always happen because sometimes the firm may want to strategize to not to raise the price too much, to try to maintain their competitive position, maintain their market share in a foreign market, right? So because the European sweaters in the U.S. market, they want to maintain their market share because there may be other things that that are competing with the European sweaters in the U.S. So they don't want to lose the market share. So they may not raise the price all the way to $100. Maybe they'll just raise it to 90 to sort of absorb some of the losses, but maintain the market share. So this is called incomplete pass-through. Okay, 100% pass-through would mean that they will raise the price all the way to $100. But if they raise it to less than 100, that's the incomplete pass-through. What the effect of that would be that it will affect our calculation here, right? So it will affect this. It will affect the price, this thing, okay? If you know the home is the U.S., it will affect this. It will not rise as much. Okay, it will not rise from 75 to 100, but it rises from 75 to 90. So it will have a dampening effect on the effect of a depreciation on the current account. Okay, the magnitude will be smaller. The magnitude will be smaller. So, for example, 10% appreciation of a currency often leads to less than 10% increase in export price, as the exporters may be willing to bear lower profits in the short run so as to maintain market share. All right. Okay, does that make sense? So it's reasonable to assume that an increase in the EP star over P, the real exchange rate, usually leads to an improvement in current account at about a year's time, as I just said. Okay, depreciation usually leads to an improvement. Yeah.
So exchange rate pass-through also affect the price of exports? Would it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a good point. That's a good point. Right. Yeah. So they will collect. So the U.S. Depending on. Well, let me see. Yeah, yeah. Strictly speaking, you're right. It's not the price. So if I may not want to collect the same price as before. Yeah, you're right. Good point. Good point. Yeah, yeah. Okay. But the idea is that the magnitude of that change would be compressed, would be smaller. The magnitude of that change, you see that, yeah. So the change will be smaller. The magnitude of the change will be smaller. The direction may be the same. The direction actually may be the same. Yeah. So, to conclude, there are two factors that affect the current account, right? One is the real exchange rate. Given that it is, if we wait for up to a year, that will increase the current account. Disposable income will actually decrease the current account. Disposable income will decrease, and increasing the disposable income will decrease the current account because import will increase. Right? Does it make sense? All right. Now, let's look at the other components. The other components of the aggregate demand, right? Remember, we have four, right? We have a consumption demand, with a investment demand, government purchases demand, and current account. So we already covered the consumption one, and then we already covered the what is that? The net export. So we're going to make it very simple for G, for the government purchase. Just assume that government purchase is just exogenous. So no theory about how G is determined. Okay, just that G is exogenous. It's determined by the government. Okay, and also I, the investment I. How is investment I determined? Typically, in your closed economy macro, you say, okay, investment is determined by the interest rate, right? If the interest rate is low, then more investment. But in our course, even investment, we just assume that it is exogenous, okay? So there's no theory about how investment is determined, okay? So we just want to make this model simple enough, okay? So the simplification is that G and I are exogenous, and even T, the tax. Tax also exogenous, right? No theory about how tax is determined. Now, some of you may not be very happy that investment is totally exogenous and not affected by interest rate, right? So most people think that interest rate will affect investment. In fact, again, I think in the appendix of this chapter, there is, I believe it's in this book, the appendix. They will actually have, they go back to this so-called ISLM. I think many of you are familiar with this ISLM kind of analysis, right? In a closed economy, right? In the appendix of this chapter, there is an ISLM version, and basically all the result, most of the result that in the simplified version of the model will also go through with a more sophisticated ISLM framework. So it's consistent. It's perfectly consistent with the ISLM, except that we just don't make things. We try to simplify things, so the result is more transparent. Okay, make sense? So we can assume that the investment in I is determined by source of business decisions. A more complicated model shows that investment depends on cost of spending or borrowing to finance investment, which is the interest rate, right? Okay. Okay. Any questions? All right. All right. So basically, your aggregate demand is therefore expressed as this equation. Okay. Consumption expenditure as a function of disposable income is a positively related. Investment expenditure and government purchases both exogenous. Okay, and then the current account, right? So the first component is the real exchange rate. Okay, so that is a positively related to the real exchange rate, but negatively related to the disposable income. So you can sort of put it like that. Okay, all right. In terms of aggregate demand include real exchange rate, okay, disposable income, right? We already talked about it actually, right? But disposable income actually has two effects, okay? Real exchange rate affect only the net exchange rate, the net export, but disposable income actually affects two components. It affects the consumption component. It also affects the current account component. Okay, but it turns out it is actually eventually you'll see that the effect on consumption will dominate. The effect on consumption is going to dominate the effect on the current account because why? Because the disposable income affect imports. Right? But this import, the reason why disposable income increases import is because disposable income increases consumption expenditure. So, so the effect of disposable income on total consumption expenditure must be greater than the effect of disposable income on imported consumer goods, right? The first must be greater than the second. Therefore, the effect of disposable income on consumption expenditure must dominate the effect on the net exports. Does it make sense? So now here it's the equilibrium of the economy is the output equilibrium in the output market basically would be when the value of output and income from production is equal to aggregate demand. So this is equilibrium because if the right hand side is greater than the left hand side, then there is not enough output to satisfy the demand. Okay, so then firms will have to increase their output, okay, and so on. But okay, so let me just pause here. Let me pause here. I would like to use just a few minutes to go through the homework a little bit. Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. So let me just see. I just have just a few minutes, but that's enough, I think. Let me see here. Where's the homework? Oh, okay. So I have to say one thing, that I have actually modified the question number 4 a little bit. I'm sorry about that. If you have already submitted your homework, then don't worry about it. But if you have not, I have lengthened the question a little bit. I'd like you to look at a permanent increase in national real money demand function how it affects the real and nominal exchange rate, the price level, and the real and nominal interest rates. So over all of them. Okay, it's not much more work. It's not much more work. You need to think about it anyway. So is there any question about question number 4? No. Okay. Question number 5, I believe, is also quite straightforward, right? Is there any question about question number 5?
Is this A and B the same thing?
Are they the same thing? No, they're not the same thing. Why do you say they're the same thing?
Like the diagram effect.
Well, it's up to you to answer the question. I'm not going to tell you what's the answer, but they are not. We're not talking about the same thing, right? Say one is the domestic residents spend more on non-traded goods, but the other is the foreign residents shift their demand from their own good towards the home country's exports. They're not the same thing. It's you decide how it shifts the curves and affect the real exchange rate. Remember, we're talking about the long run. It's long run. Now, I think that the more challenging question is question number 6. But I don't know what hint I need to give you. I don't. It's hard. I don't want to give away the answer, right? So, but you need to kind of think of 2 kind of situations. One is, right, real appreciation is associated with the exporters being hurt, and the other is the real appreciation associated with exporters being better off. Okay. So I'll let you think about it. But I'm just trying to clarify the question, actually. Do you have any question? Do you have any question about the questions? Yeah. Oh, being hurt? Oh, profit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So if there's no question, then we'll have the tutorial tomorrow, and see you on Thursday. Thank you.